Today, I am sitting with Furnish, and she is a life coach and social entrepreneur. But very awesomely, her focus is actually on positive psychology, and she's got her own podcast and written books. She's done a whole myriad of things. So, firstly, thanks so much for taking the time today. I'm really glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's
Yeah,
lovely to be here.
and as I said, yeah, you've had so many things going on. You've also studied applied positive psychology, and you've really dug deep in all these things. But for those who haven't come across you and who want to get to know you, just give everyone a quick hey, and give a bit of an introduction to yourself.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Well, you did a great job there of an introduction. Covered most of the things that I do, and yeah, you're correct. The kind of like the core that goes through my work is positive psychology, and that was born out of studying applied positive psychology, which I did a couple of years ago. And before that, I've been a counsellor. I've worked as a counsellor. I've worked as a parenting specialist and a relationship counsellor. So I bring all those kind of different strengths to my work. And currently, positive psychology is so core to it. And I have a social enterprise, and the social enterprise is to bring those skills and those strategies to the community. A lot of my work is online at the moment, obviously, and before the pandemic, it would be in the community, working with people in groups, taking people outside in nature. That, as you say, and sometimes when I talk and I think, oh yeah, I do that as well, and I do that, because what's popped into my head is laughter yoga. Which is something that I started about 4 or 5 years ago by going to a class myself, and then realizing what a brilliant lift it can be if you can kind of take off your head and not think too much about it and really get in your body. It's a brilliant way to become present and just lift your spirit. So laughter yoga as well is something that I do. So yeah, there's quite a lot there. Something for everybody, I think.
Yeah, but also as we were kind of discussing just before we started, it's almost like you've always had this overarching theme of helping people, but in just various ways, like from the counseling, and then you say working with communities, and then you learn something about laughter yoga and experience it yourself, and you're like, wow, I think other people could benefit from this. Let me introduce it. It's just that constant overriding theme of helping people in various ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love life and having experiences. I think one of my strengths is being open. So I'm open to experience. So when laughter yoga, for example, was mentioned, I was like, yeah, I haven't done that. Let's give that a go. And I think, I always think, well, if I like it, and there's probably going to be somebody else that likes it and maybe hasn't thought about it, or hasn't had the opportunity. And I love to give people opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like when you're doing all these different things, because I've spoken to a few people as well, they start to learn something for themselves and they're like, oh, wow, this is really powerful. Do you try to incorporate all the different things you're learning into almost like one framework of your own? Or you like, okay, this time I think laughter yoga is going to work well with you. I think this is going to work well. And you kind of do them quite separately, or do you kind of integrate it all into one go?
I think it's integrated. I think this is what somebody told me, fed this back to me once, one of my friends, and I think it is so right. I kind of integrate as I go along in life. So I have these experiences, and like I explained about laughter, then I will go, I'll do it myself and get familiar with it, and then I'll say, and then it was suddenly, well, actually, I could spread this out further.
Yeah.
So I guess always there's that underlying theme, without me really realizing it, is of being of service, which is kind of what you said about helping people. So that is my motivation, is sharing, is spreading out.
Yeah, I mean,
Joy spreading.
yeah, I mean, especially in the last 2 years, I think positive focus on positive psychology and mindsets is, yeah, I mean, that's probably pretty big for a lot of people and needed massively. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to kind of take steps all the way back to the counseling, because
Yeah.
I've spoken to quite a few people who, like, let's say they were in corporate life and then they decide to make a late transition into coaching and helping others. But it sounds like almost from the get-go, you were always like, I want to help others. Like, how did that kind of start kicking off from the very first kind of foray?
Yeah, lovely. Well, so it really, I think all of my passion for personal development starts right back in the beginning of not time, actually, you know, sort of like going back thinking, you know, school life, just like getting on with it. I was quite active and like to learn. So that love of learning has always come from way back then. There was a pivotal moment. I had my first child, and I had postnatal depression, which absolutely like turned my life around, and never had anything like that before. And I think when you have something that's that defining moment, isn't it, which you don't realize at the time. And so from there, it was very much about, I need to look after I realize now I need to look after myself. And so that as well as helping others, that need to look after myself is literally run right through my life. So that was my defining moment. And that was 35 years ago. And so for 35 years, I've been aware, building my self-awareness and building my toolkit to look after myself.
Yeah, and naturally it's gonna, as you say, develop and evolve as you change as a person, as you learn more, and then you're having to pick up new things, and then you can teach those along the way, and potentially with the people who you've also been with in those previous iterations, like, hey, this is what I'm doing now. I think you're still gonna really benefit from this. Like, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that time, I was a exercise teacher, so I was teaching aerobics, and I was, you know, really happy with that, and it was something that was good for my mental health. And I seem to have gone on this journey, which is moving from body to mind to spirit, back to body again. It's fascinating to me to see that change. When I was teaching exercise, and when it's very much about the physical, I just felt that there was something missing, almost like, you know, beliefs maybe around change and about looking after your body. And people would want to exercise, and they'd want to take control of their weight and not be able to. And so that was my kind of interest then into motivation and behavior. So from there, I studied psychology. And then since then I've become more spiritual, and now I'm one of my focuses really is embodiment, about how our bodies. So I've gone round in a circle.
Yeah, and then eventually it all becomes one.
Yeah.
And how far into, so you had that experience with postnatal depression, and that's when you start to do a lot of work on yourself. How long after that did you go into officially studying, quote unquote, the psychology route?
It was quite a while, actually, if I think about it. So that was 35, and then 35 years ago, and then it was probably about 10 years. About 10 years later that I started to study. So all that time I was had a family, so I was primary carer, so that was my focus. And then I went, after when one of my youngest child was 2, I then went back to study, started my counselling, and and the counselling absolutely took the lid off of my personal development and self-awareness. It was like crazy. And there was a huge shift in that, which I'm really grateful for, and it's been a great grounding for me.
How so? How did that show up for you when you said it kind of took the lid off? And
well, literally self-awareness, about thinking about my own behavior, my own relationships, what I wanted from life, how I wanted to show up, how I was showing up. yeah, it was quite profound.
Okay, so
And
it was.
I think because I take things on so readily and I learn quite easily and put things into practice, people around me were quite shell shocked. My relationships, bless him, my husband.
Oh, do you mean like you would make these changes that you're learning about
Yeah,
straight away, and people like, whoa,
yeah,
what just kind of happened?
yes, yes. So that whole transition really into, recognizing your own behavior, and then, that whole transition when you put it into practice. And that's something that I'm very aware of more, especially now when I work with other people, and it's like self-awareness is fantastic because it gives you those tools and it gives you the information that you need. And there is a dark side to it. Be aware of how your changing affects other people.
Oh, okay, interesting. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think I can give you an example of something that I quite often talk about now in terms of people pleasing. What I talk about is that I'm a reformed people pleaser. And I think and a lot of some of my clients that come to me, that they don't come to me because, I realize that I do too much for other people and not enough for myself. There'll be something else, there'll be another symptom, and then we might cover that issue might come up. For example, how are you looking after yourself? How are you looking after your needs? And then it will become clear that possibly they didn't have any idea of what their needs are, or what would make life more pleasant for them. They haven't been encouraged, or maybe had the bravery to think about it. It's been denied. So that suppression of need. So I talk about that as in that was me, and now I'm very much aware of my needs.
Yeah.
And I think when this was my experience, when I first became aware of, actually I've got needs, and I'm giving so much to other people, I think there can be a build-up of anger and resentment. And which can come out, probably it's not used to being let out, and so it can come out sort of like quite strongly. And then I think the more you get used to, maybe the other area that I'm tipping into there is assertiveness. The more you get into being able to be more assertive, then you're kinder. I think without that knowledge and that experience, it can come across as quite rebellious and harsh.
So you're saying when people often discover their assertiveness and their like true kind of needs and desires, they
Yeah.
actually come across as being kinder.
I think initially they might come across as being aggressive,
Okay.
in terms of resentment, and these a number of years where you might not have felt that you've been considered or respected. And and so it's getting over that, really. It's almost like recognizing that it's a person's responsibility to meet their needs. Not expect other people to meet them for them, and that we don't have to give everything away. I think I come from a position where I'm very, as you said, I like to help people, so I'm very giving, and that can go too far. We have to keep something back for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I wasn't.
I think that really ties into that first bit of what you were saying about when you started the counting. That's when it took off the lid for your own personal development, because how I understood what you're saying and interpreted it is that by working with so many different people and they have their own unique situations and behaviors, you would see them doing something. You're like, hey, this is actually a sign that you need to work on this and work on that. And you're like, oh, wait, I do that as well, type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So being able to, I think because of my life experiences, I can relate to other people and their situations that they're going through, maybe their own personal development journey, because I'm on my own journey and recognize it as such. I mean, we called the podcast a work in progress, the podcast I do, and I just totally believe that. I think, you know, we're never finished. There's always something, and that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful lesson for those who want to potentially start off on the coaching journey, in that you're always going to be learning. It's like, be aware to the fact that you're also going to be learning, and because that might also be changing what you're doing. So it's like, don't fight it necessarily, because like you said, working with other people could potentially take the lid of your own development, and then you're just going to become a completely different person in the long run.
Yeah.
So when you experienced the postnatal depression and you started working on that yourself to kind of help yourself with those things, did you then go start working with other people as well in that space already back then?
No, I didn't, and I can remember thinking that it would have been really helpful if I could have talked to somebody, if someone else had that experience and might have shared that with me. I had some support in terms of some friends that had been through depression, which was really helpful, and they reached out to me. But specifically that postnatal depression, it wasn't really. As far as I was aware, it was a different time. I mean, now we would get on the internet. Oh, I sound really old now, but now we would get on the internet and like Google it, wouldn't we? But back in those days, there was an isolation around it. So basically, it was the doctor, and I think we're coming from a time then when it was like, you know, a bit of an unusual thing to even go to a counsellor in those days. It wasn't as normal as it is now, and so I was just wondering. No, I didn't have counselling. I took medication. I tell you what really helped me was writing. So that's when I started to keep a journal, and the reason I kept the journal was because the doctor would say to me, you know, how has today been, or how has this week been? And I didn't know. I couldn't answer, you know, in the depth of depression. And then so what I did was I started writing, which, you know, writing a journal and, you know, kind of like breaking down my time and really sort of like structuring. That really helped me to structure and gave me an anchor. And that I've carried that on as well through my life. So it's a great tool. Great tool.
I thought you had kind of, after having experienced it yourself and also worked through it, I thought you had started giving some support to others who had been experiencing that as well. But it sounds like that would have been powerful for you though, if you had that.
Yeah, I think probably at that time I didn't recognize the sort of like the impact. Maybe because it was such a shock, I think maybe I wanted to just move away from it. Although my heart might have been saying at the time I could have benefited, I don't know that I was in the place to give back at that time. Okay. And it was when I had some relationship, that we then moved on. I had some relationship difficulties. That's when it really started giving back, because I had some relationship counselling, and then I became a relationship counsellor. So at that point, so I was a little bit older by that time.
Okay. Was that before or after, for those watching now, was that before or after you studied officially psychology, or was that?
It was. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was before then, because I felt that I really enjoyed the counselling, and yet I felt that, and it was very experiential training. I mean, we did have theoretical training, but it was much more experiential. And I just felt that maybe to have a career that I needed, you know, more academic training. So that's when I went and studied psychology.
Yeah. But I think that's an amazing point and kind of insight for people who might want to start the journeys. You don't need to have studied anything officially. Like obviously, if you're becoming a doctor or a psychologist or something like that, you do. But things like relationship coaching, mindset coaching, if you had become like a postnatal depression consultant or something like that, or coach, you could have still helped people just from the fact that you had learned so much from it as well. It's like, You
Yeah.
don't need to necessarily have the degree in it or something like that. It's just, have you kind of worked through that yourself or helped other people work through that yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So that lived experience, I think. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because somebody said that to me only a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about the new course that I'm doing, which is about self-care. And in my mind, I didn't actually say this because I didn't want to put it out there, but in my mind, I was like, I'm not the expert in all of these areas. Exercise and diet and relaxation, I'm a bit of more of an expert. So there's areas where I'm not, there's people that know more than me.
Yeah.
However, I have put these things into practice, and that's what somebody said to me that was on my course, and she said, well, you've got lived experience. And I was like, yeah. And sometimes it's when other people feed that back to you that you realize the value.
Yeah. And you're you, like two people teaching the same thing.
Yeah.
It still comes across and resonates in a different way, just based on the personalities and the energy of each person. So it's more than just the knowledge. It's, as you said, the lived experience and the person themselves.
Definitely, and that's an interesting point. And I sort of like looked a little bit deeper into that and thought, well, what is my perspective? And I think my perspective is beliefs. I'm not I don't have the best knowledge about food, and I don't have the best knowledge about exercise. What's important to me and what I think might help someone is, what is your belief about it? So that's where I'm coming from, which is a very coaching position to come from, isn't it?
And when you started doing more of what you're focused on now, so you'd obviously had the background in relationship coaching, and you had found some clients. Just quickly, how did you kind of come across those first clients when you started doing more of the relationship coaching?
Okay, so I worked for the relationship counselling. I worked for an organisation, so they provided the clients. What I found was, when I started coaching, then it's like, well, where do you get your clients from?
Yeah.
What worked for me was I asked friends. So I asked friends to come along, work colleagues, and gave them a really good offer, and said, and was quite open, which, I think it's, that's what people need to hear. This is something that I'm interested in. I want to get this business moving. And then people do actually want to help.
Yeah.
And so they'll say, yeah, I'll give it a go. And that's how I started. And then, of course, those people then tell other people. And I've always found that works for me, is word of mouth recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important thing that you raised there, is that getting those first clients, you can just make a very good offer and be like, hey, this is something I'm trying out. Do you want to try with me? And just get those first results for yourself as well, so you can do it. And then you have the examples, you have essentially, quote unquote, like case studies. You've taken someone from this place to another place.
Definitely. Yeah, it definitely works. Yeah, I would highly recommend that. I think otherwise you've got all this knowledge to share, and experience and knowledge, and you're just sat with it. And I always think that's such a shame. I think that's my motivator. I'm like, well, I've got all of this. Let me share it.
Yeah, you can't be so greedy with it. You just got to put it out there. And each time you've made kind of a shift, because obviously you started as a relationship coach, you've gone from path to path, and now to what you do. Have you kind of taken that approach each time of, I'm changing focus now, let me find people who kind of trust me to give it a go in this area, and then that sets you off in a good way?
Yes, absolutely. I've got some lovely friends and lovely family members who come along on the ride with me. And I think they've got used to it now. I think in the first place they might have thought, oh, she's doing something different now, but now they embrace it. And which strikes me that I'm on the right path for a lot of people. And they'll come along and support me, and you know, and that will make the groups, because I do a lot of groups now, so it just makes a lovely dynamic in a group, to have people that have been, you know, with me for a little while, and new people that come along.
Okay, so do you almost, in regards to the groups, how does that work? Is it almost like a rotating group, or do you kind of keep the groups together when you work with them, or how does that work?
Well, it's an interesting one, because this was born out of lockdown, because I hadn't actually done groups. I hadn't worked with groups online. I'd done groups in a physical space, but I hadn't actually done it online, and I've just done one-to-one. And so I moved it online, and again started quite small. You know, sort of like just asking people, is this something you're interested in? And, you know, a bit of advertising. And what I found was that we started with Positive Psychology Part 1, which was a 6-week course. And I worked with a colleague of mine. What we then did is, well, there's lots more material, so we could do a Part 2. And so the people that were on Part 1 came to Part 2, but we also advertised it out to other people. So we had a bit of a mixture, and we've just written Part 3, and we've just got people that have done Part 1 and Part 2. They love it. They come to Part 3. So that's our kind of strategy, just to keep offering things that we think people might like, that we've already got contact with. And then the other thing that became clear to me, and I think it was in the gap between Part 1 and Part 2, there was a you know, weeks of gap, say a month or so. And I thought, well, you know, people have put the work in, and when you go to a group, you apply it, and you maybe do some work in between times, and you practice positive psychology, and you might get into a gratitude practice. And yet then you don't go to the group. What happens? So what I did was I started a practice group. So it's free to those people that have done the courses, and they just come along, and it's a set one evening, and just come along and talk about anything really, with that structure of sharing and you know, just helping each support really to practice.
Yeah, that's a powerful thing. It's almost like aftercare. I've seen in a few programs, more like business programs, but I've also seen it in one person I work with who does astral projection, and also you have kind of the one-on-one face-to-face sessions for a certain amount of time, but then afterwards you still have lifetime access to the whole community, that you can still be involved. You're not just suddenly kind of put out in the cold, almost, as they say.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because it's not what I set out to do. I didn't have this kind of like in my mind, right, I'll do an online group, and I'll have something alongside it. It was just, it evolved, and it evolved out of a problem really. And the problem was, if you're not going somewhere where you're accountable, then things slip, and it's human nature, isn't it?
Can you expand on that? Do you mean you being accountable, or the people you're working with being accountable?
Well, I see the groups that I provide as you know, a way to be for someone to, it's something to be accountable to. And I know that for myself. So if I'm going to a meditation group, then I will meditate if I, you know, in my own time. And if I'm not, then that practice slips. It doesn't go away completely. It just is not sort of, is being in uppermost, isn't it, in the mind?
It's also the big thing of, if other people are posting like, oh, I had the most amazing session, someone else is like, oh, awesome job, and another person's like, oh, on my 5th day in a row, then you're like, oh damn, I want to get my post up there, type of thing.
Exactly. And what I absolutely love about groups is that the support and the helping each other. And I think that's such a brilliant dynamic, rather than learning from me. You know, there is some of that, obviously, but also it's about that interaction between
learning from each other.
learning from each other, definitely.
So I think that people watching who they will gain a lot of value from just if you explained a bit about, so when you went from you were doing one-to-one, you really enjoyed doing stuff in person, and then obviously the dramatic shift when everything had to go online. How did you kind of handle that migration, or what did it kind of look like for you?
Well, I was really, really fortunate that I was working for a private healthcare company, and almost like having my business run alongside that. So I was employed and running my business.
Mm-hmm.
It was just really when it was just starting, and I'd worked for them for quite a while, and their business was all online. So I had been working as a coach and a clinician, mental health clinician, online with a slightly different platform, but it was still what I was used to. So it was a really easy transition for me. And I know that some people that hadn't worked online, it was quite a maybe a bit of resistance around it, and lack of information. I just transferred because I was used to it. That was lucky.
Okay, that's pretty great. Um,
Yeah.
and so for you, obviously changing from space to space, not space to space, but focus to focus, as you develop yourself and you learn from others and you're learning more, etc. How do you kind of go about deciding, like, this is what my new offer is going to be, or how often kind of do you make those iterations?
I don't know if anyone noticed then, but I did actually laugh, giggle to myself then, because I guess what I'm hearing you say is strategy, and I know that's my weak area, because I guess I'm quite intuitive and I just go along. Now, I can't say that I bumble along, because that's not how it works. I think because I'm focused and I have a lot of ideas. And so I guess I'm focused and creative, and go with and adaptable, because I just go with wherever we're going. And I do recognize that maybe a strategy might be quite a good thing for me. So I tend to have a word of the year, and my word for this year was expansion. And my word, one of the little contenders for next year is strategy. So I'll come back to you on that one.
Okay. But I think it does tie back into some of the things you were saying. It's just as you learn more things, you're just like, hey, let me put it out to people and just see what they think.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got an example of that, in that I'd always wanted to get a meditation practice. And I just really struggled to do it, and to, that whole thing, find the time and, know which meditation. Anyway, it just didn't really happen. And I knew that when I did do it, I really enjoyed it. And so I met a meditation teacher, and quite fortunately, and we started to collaborate and help each other. And so I learned meditation. She taught me some guided meditations. And so from that, I thought, well, I struggle. And so maybe other people struggle. And well, I know that other people struggle. And so then we started offering classes and courses. So there's an example. So I tried it, I found that I found something that works for me. And then so from that, I've gone, let's do that. So let's put some courses out.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
It's also, I feel like it comes down to trust as well, a lot. The fact that you've also gotten to know your clients over time. So when you come out with something new,
Yeah.
they know it's with nothing but good intention. You're like, hey, I really believe this is going to be beneficial to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did take that, I wouldn't say risk, But it was a definite, almost like a different shift, because I'd been offering positive psychology courses, which are fairly, you know, for the mind really, and mind and body. And then I've gone, actually, guys, I've got this new course, and it's really drills down into self-care. And then what happens is, I like to call them members, my members. They it's not a membership, but they're just members of my groups.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh yeah, I do need to get better at self-care, but maybe they hadn't thought about it particularly. And so I say, there, here it is. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I
don't know what's next.
No, it's a brilliant insight to kind of summarize and wrap up on, is that, as you were saying, if it's coming from a place where you just want to help in various ways, it's just, you just put it out to people and just kind of see what they say.
Yeah.
So if people want to check out everything that you've got going on and dig into the podcast, what's the best way for people to connect with you and reach out to you?
So thank you for, I know I've mentioned the podcast a couple of times. The podcast is Positivity, a Work in Progress, and it's on most of the platforms. And that's a free way to sort of like find out more about me and what I do and what's important to me. And my website, www.𝗏𝗏𝐶𝗔𝗍𝑐𝗺𝗏𝑐𝗿.com.
Yeah, and we'll also include all the links and everything, so
Thank
it's easy
you.
to find.
Thank you. Just get in touch. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah, and no, thanks so much for your time. I think it's awesome when people hear the journey of like what inspires people to go in the direction. Then you went to also officially study, and then it's always just constantly been changing. So I think there's a lot of really good insights there.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Chat soon.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Automator series as much as I enjoyed having it. And there are two things I want you to do now. I want you firstly to follow me on YouTube, get that subscription in, because you're going to see all the new episodes popping up in that case, and you can stay on top of the series. And the second thing is, I want you to reach out to me. If anything we discussed on the episode today resonated with you in regards to potentially taking a jump into an online spiritual coaching business, or you really have a business and you're wanting to grow that out and you're feeling like you could be impacting a lot more lives, but you don't quite have the time right now, you don't quite have the freedom you wanted, and you don't quite have those systems in place, I want you to reach out to me. It's a no pressure, no strings attached. Send me a message on Facebook, LinkedIn, email, whatever you prefer, and we can just have a conversation and a bit of a back and forth in regards to where you're at, what you're looking for, and how I might be able to help you impact more lives with what you're doing.